I wanted to do my impression of the three pigs
Oh yeah.
from the.
Oh yeah. He huffed and he puffed and he signed an eviction notice.
Welcome. You are entering into a strange dimension. A dimension where narratives from across space and time come together. Narratives that could have, might have, or should have been all exist here in one space. This is Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline.
Welcome back to Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline. I'm Andrew DeYoung, or Janglez the Strange, and as always, I am joined by my beautifully bearded co-host, Nate Draper. I'm trying to get a little bit more creative with how I introduce you, because you said handsome I used too many times.
I didn't mean to complain. I mean, they're all great. I like the introductions. I appreciate them, so thank you.
No worries.
It's good to be back on the show.
It's always good to be back on the show. I mean, we run the show, yeah.
Eventually,
I'd like to get...
I'm always here, so...
Eventually, I'd like to get some guests on the show, but we'll see what happens, so... Yeah. So today we're talking about Shrek 2, which interestingly doesn't have a title, so they chose to just go with Shrek 2, not like, I don't know, Ogres of Madness.
Shrek the Second.
Yeah, the Shrekening. Shrek 2, the Shrekening. Yeah, so your thoughts on Shrek?
I thought it was really funny, actually. I think it's a funny movie. It made me laugh. My favorite part was when giant gingerbread man attacks and all the people run outside, run from one Starbucks and run to the Starbucks directly across the street.
Yeah.
I thought there's a lot of really subtle jokes like that.
Yeah.
The reason I appreciate that is because in Vancouver, where I currently reside, there was for a period two Starbucks on opposite sides of the street, and you could just walk across the street and go from one to the other.
Yeah, so if they kick you out,
it's kind of a West Coast thing, I guess.
If they kick you out for using up their Wi-Fi for too long, then you can just
go across the street.
Go across the street.
Yeah, they don't. It's not there. It's only one now. I think at one point it was actually on an intersection. I think there was one on each intersection. I'm told at one point.
Wow.
When I moved here, there was two. Yeah, which is still ridiculous.
Is that just because it was like a major intersection and it was hard to like make left-hand turns?
I guess so. Well, it was right in. It was probably the most. I was going to say, I'm going to pick my words carefully. It's the most elitist intersection in Vancouver.
Ooh, elitist
Maybe.
intersection. Okay.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to put that. But, so you enjoyed the movie. I too thought like there was a lot of funny things in there. I'll say my favorite joke out of this whole thing was, I don't know if anyone noticed, but, the guy who plays the king, Harold, is John Cleese from Monty Python, and there's a point in there where he's sort of babbling to himself, and he's on the balcony, and his wife's in bed, and she's like reading a book, and she hears him scream because the fairy godmother has shown up, and she's like, "Harold, is everything okay?" And he goes, "Oh yes, everything's fine, just the old crusade wound," as a reference to Monty Python. Yeah.
Oh, is that what that was?
I think that's supposed to be a reference to Monty Python. So,
probably, yeah, that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
I hadn't made that connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I laughed a lot. Like, there's some really good jokes in there, but I kind of felt like it was just superfluous pop culture references to make up for the fact that there is a plot in there. There is a plot, but to make up for the fact that most of the movie is actually just like jokes and references to cover up the fact that the plot is basically Shrek and Fiona like each other, and then they don't like each other, and then they like each other again.
But the weird thing is they do like each other still. It's just this very bizarre misunderstanding.
So this is my
really
least
work.
favorite kind of movie. Movies that are built upon lack
A
of
romantic comedy?
No, well, I don't mind a good romantic comedy if there's something new and clever in it. If it does something new and clever, like Deadpool, which is essentially a romantic comedy at its core.
Yeah,
Right?
actually, yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of putting Deadpool in that category, but it does fit actually.
It's like the smartest, most meta romantic comedy there is. with a huge amount of action and violence and swearing in it. But
Yeah.
but no, movies that are built upon misunderstandings where the two main characters who are supposedly in love just don't talk to each other to resolve their problems. I hate that because it boggles my mind when people, it's just like this entire movie is built upon a set of circumstances that could have been resolved from the get-go had people been honest about their feelings. And I find that really frustrating because, I don't know, I'm a really open and honest person. So building a plot around something as easily resolvable without some kind of further push is really frustrating.
Yeah, it was. I would compare it to the misunderstandings that you see in the romantic comedies I've worked on.
Yes, I'm familiar with the romantic comedies you are talking about.
Yeah. I won't say what Christmas card company is responsible for them.
But it's definitely a Christmas card company that is also responsible for other cards that are not just Christmas.
Yeah.
And we'll leave that
And
at
entertaining the red states.
Yes, and we'll leave it. Getting political up on Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline.
That's it. I'm stopping.
Okay. Okay. So you caught me off guard there. So yeah, those kinds of misunderstandings make for easy writing. It's like the characters don't require that much depth. It makes for easy writing because you don't require a lot of work in the plot. It's just, I mean, Shrek and Fiona in this movie are basically like, oh, we're married and in love. You should come meet my parents. And Shrek goes, this is a bad idea. Well, you should do it anyway. And then it winds up being a bad idea, just like he said. And she goes, how come you're not trying? I made changes for you. And he's like, okay, I guess I'll try. And then they argue. And then Shrek's like, maybe Fiona is happier without me, even though that's stupid. And Fiona, and then at the end, Fiona's like, I'm so sorry for ever doubting you. I love you for who you are. So I'm sorry for being a butt. And he's like, yeah, I'm sorry for not believing in our love.
Yeah.
I mean, I basically
that's
just
it.
did the summary right there. I'll go into more detailed summary, but like, oh, I don't know, man. And
I also felt it was I feel like she was way too forgiving on her parents.
oh yeah, I go into that on my pitch. I'm going to talk about that.
It's like, oh, hi, mom and dad. It's okay that you locked me in a tower for my entire adolescence. That's not a problem.
Yeah, thanks for not caring about me enough so that even though I'm only hideous at night, but first of all, hideous, even though I'm only a hideous beast at night, you still had to lock me in a goddamn tower.
Yeah.
Like, there's a point in there that Shrek makes where he goes, oh yeah, dragging in a tower was cheaper than daycare, which I thought was really, really funny, but also kind of poignant because daycare is super expensive and it shouldn't be. Not that daycare people shouldn't get paid, don't get me wrong, like ECE is, but it's just like, that's kind of funny because he's probably right. Yeah. The other thing I noticed about this movie is that a lot of what motivates even the first Shrek is just ribbing at Disney. Constantly, like, Disney is like, these are the tropes that Disney leans on, and Shrek is always like, how can we subvert these ideals that Disney has come up with? And to its credit, Disney was formulaic for a long time, but they've come a long way. Now, I know this movie came out in like 2004, I think.
I think I saw 2004.
2004, yeah. I think, is when this movie came out. But it's like, Disney has come a long way. And to be honest, DreamWorks, the last good DreamWorks, well, my favorite DreamWorks movie is The Prince of Egypt. And recent DreamWorks movies outside of How to Train Your Dragon have been lackluster.
Kung Fu Panda?
First Kung Fu Panda.
Right. That's before How to Train Your Dragon as well.
Yeah. The first Kung Fu Panda was ridiculously good. Very clever. But then we have 3 Kung Fu Pandas now. We're about to get the third How to Train Your Dragon. There's 5 main series Shrek movies, not including the Halloween special, the Christmas special.
Oh. I didn't realize there was that many.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew there were shorts that they were doing.
Yeah, plus Despicable.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, there's like these shorts that they did. Then there's Despicable Swamp Stories is another one that's a TV series or like an anthology.
Oh, okay.
Then there's Despicable 1, 2, and 3 plus the Minions movie.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I don't know. Like they seem to really pick a topic and just run with it. Whereas
Yeah, or one of them that whatever one works, I guess you just do it again.
My big thing is if you don't set out to tell a story that happens to be in a sequel, don't just set up a sequel for it.
Unless you're able to do it well, like Incredibles 2.
I haven't seen it yet. No spoilers.
Okay, I won't say anything.
Okay.
That was a very satisfying sequel.
Ooh, yeah.
Although it's just at a weird side note, I read a really interesting article. I don't agree with it, but it was maybe one of the most interesting reviews I read that hinted at some very subtle populism in Incredibles 2. I thought it was pretty funny.
Oh, maybe I'll have to watch that one.
Yeah, it's funny though because if you think about it, you can kind of see it in Incredibles 1 as well.
Okay,
it's not meant to be there at all, and you're definitely reading into it, but you could make the argument that it's there.
I'd be interested to hear that argument. It's interesting that we're talking about Incredibles while I'm wearing my Incredibles shirt.
That's what it made me think about it. Yes,
and I haven't.
For those of you who are listening at home, we're on Skype or Facebook call. And Andrew is wearing an Incredibles t-shirt.
I'm wearing my Incredibles t-shirt.
Studio.
It's one of my favorites, yeah. The last thing I wanted to say about Shrek 2 before we get into this guy is there's a lot of really great actors in this movie, like John Cleese, Julie Andrews, who is like one of my all-time, I think she's like on the tops of actors and actresses. But I feel like they're totally...
She's great.
Yeah, they're totally underutilized. Like they're just... Julie Andrews has like all of... a minute total speaking lines?
Probably. Yeah, she doesn't... Yeah. I was surprised she didn't burst into song. Like that she was one of the characters that didn't spontaneously burst into singing.
Again, side topic, but Julie Andrews has had like throat surgery that caused her like throat to not be able to produce the same voice that she used to. Yeah, it was this huge deal. Like when you think about Julie Andrews, usually people think Mary Poppins or
Sound of Music,
or The Sound of Music, or the Broadway version, the not film version of My Fair Lady. But she lost her voice through some series of surgeries and sickness and stuff like that, and it's kind of a tragedy because Julie Andrews is known for her voice. But it's great to see her in other things where like she's still acting. But doesn't need to sing. I just wanted to say like some of the actors that get used or mentioned were super underutilized. This movie is just pop culture references to cover up its lack of real plot. Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't disagree with that. It does feel like there are some inconsistencies and some directions the plot goes that really don't make sense.
Any last thoughts before I go into a summary?
I was also really upset that they butchered a David Bowie song.
Yeah, they butcher a lot
of Yeah. But I think that's it.
They
did bring back the eels though. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. The real
I mean, it's nice seeing an eel song used in a movie.
Yeah. Or Ricky Martin.
Oh yeah.
The real weird thing about this movie is that sometimes you have to ask if you're not continuing a story when you're making a sequel, like if the story wasn't originally designed to have a sequel, what is the point of the movie? Or rather, what does the movie do differently or uniquely that the first one didn't? And the only thing that this movie really does that's unique is we see Shrek and Donkey get transformed into a quote-unquote ideal version of themselves. But we never... I don't know, it doesn't really do anything new. The plot's not different. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree. I mean, I don't know their reasons for making it. I assume it has something to do with box office. But I do believe that the way you approach it is you would ask those questions and you go, what other direction can we go in terms of exploring the characters that wasn't explored in the first one?
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, my simple answer to that is Fiona, actually. I think Fiona should have been the lead,
the primary,
the main character in this one.
Yeah. I agree. I think Fiona would have made a more compelling. We've seen Shrek and we've seen Donkey. I think Fiona would have made a more compelling main character. Oh, don't tell me you made your pitch like with Fiona, like changing focus or changing the story simply by just changing Fiona as the main character.
Actually, there was a bit more to it than that, but that was kind of the gist of what I did.
You're so clever. As soon as we start talking, I'm like, oh, why didn't I do that? Oh, why didn't I do that? Like, and the last thing I wanted to ask and talk about is as a piece of trivia was, are you aware that the director and sort of creative team behind the first Shrek anyway was because the dude left Disney, and so a lot of the like ideas behind the first Shrek were about ribbing on Disney, about the way that they dealt with things. Like, for instance, like, a guy who lives in a pristine castle who removes the original characters, magical characters, and his name is Lord Farquaad, and if you say it with a more of a British accent, it comes out like fuckwad.
Yeah, I could definitely see that now.
Yeah,
because the first movie it feels like a giant stick it to Disney.
Yeah, it's like a big middle finger to Disney. And I felt like this movie, the sequel, was like, oh, how can we keep that going? But you'd already made that point. They'd already made that point.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't do anything new. That's really, this movie is superfluous. Not that it's bad, it just doesn't do anything new.
Yeah. I was going to say, I when it first came out, I really enjoyed it, actually, when I was younger, when it came out. I won't say how old I was when I saw it, but I was young when it came out in theaters. But I think that was just because the humor, like I still found myself laughing at the jokes.
Yeah.
There was just more jokes that I got this time as an adult. But
interestingly,
now watching it, I also recognize there were some things about it. It's not as tight a movie as the first Shrek movie by any measure.
I wouldn't do anything with the first movie. I wouldn't do a Cinemasters with the first movie because I think it's a great one.
I think it's fine.
Yeah, but this one I think could have been, like, there's some ideas that could have been. I got kind of political with mine, so.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I may have. Yeah.
All right, well, let me do a summary, and then I want to hear your pitch, okay?
All right, cool.
All right, here we go. So a pompous Prince Charming reads a narration from a book, and then we see him climb the tower that Fiona had been in previously, only to find out from the wolf that she is on her honeymoon. We then see Shrek and Fiona happily married, enjoying their honeymoon with a funny montage, only to have the mood ruined by Donkey, who is as annoying as ever as they come back home. The couple then receive an invitation to Fiona's home kingdom of Far, Far Away. They're invited to a ball to celebrate their new union. Reluctantly, the trio then travel there and are greeted awkwardly when they arrive. Shrek and King Harold do not get along, and when the fairy godmother appears, she tries to help Fiona fix things so that she can be, have a happily ever after, when in reality Fiona thinks she's already happy. But this sort of rift causes more of Shrek and Fiona's relationship to deteriorate. The fairy godmother is then meets up with the king, who she seems to have something on, and reminds him that her son Charming was meant to be with Fiona. The king then tricks Shrek into getting lost in the forest and uses Puss in Boots as a hitman. With the cat in tow, Shrek and Donkey trash the fairy godmother's factory, steal a potion, and transform into the ideal versions of themselves, in quotations. Due to the nature of the potion, Fiona is also transformed back into her human form. Using the transformation to make Fiona think that Charming is now Shrek, the fairy godmother has Harold make Fiona drink a love potion so she will fall in love with Prince Charming. Shrek is rescued by his old friends, who then lay siege to the castle while the ball is happening, with the giant gingerbread man, and they manage to defeat Prince Charming and the fairy godmother. Harold is then revealed to be the Frog Prince, and Fiona and Shrek realize that what really matters is that they are happy with who each other is, and it doesn't matter what they look like on the outside. And that is, it is. I mean, all the morals are there. As a kids movie, I can't fault it. It just could be tighter.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's like it's not bad. It's just Yeah, so I actually had a lot of trouble with this one. Not gonna lie.
Really, trouble with. Okay, so when you say trouble with your pitch, you mean like you had trouble that you needed to rework so much, or you had trouble?
Well, because it was a weird thing. Because in going through, because for me the biggest thing was getting them to the castle, and my solution to that was essentially not bringing them to the castle.
Yeah.
Because I could not figure out why Fiona would be cool with hanging out with her parents.
I think I got a way around that. But enough about that. I want to hear your pitch. So just before you go into your pitch, you say you had trouble. So was your trouble with the fact that the movie has some critical flaws in it, or was the trouble the fact that you thought this movie was already tight enough, it just needed a few tweaks?
It was trouble in the sense there were maybe a few things. Trouble in the sense that I found her reasoning, just getting them to the castle, problematic, and setting that whole story in motion, I found that tricky. I just really did not buy her acceptance of going to spend time with her parents when I started thinking about it. And in my pitch, that was something I really wanted to work into it. So I just wasn't able to get them to the castle.
Yeah.
So I came up with actually a very different story. Yeah. And also I tried to, because I noticed with some of the other movies, I feel like I've had a bit more freedom to have them as ambiguous endings.
Oh, okay.
Because they're more adult. With this, I tried to stay with, it's a kid's movie. Or it's not a kid's movie, it's a family friendly movie.
Yeah.
So it's
got to have
try
like
to wrap it up a little more nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
just before you get into it, I do want to say, like, just as a disclaimer, that we actually have had a conversation about this movie before, like Shrek 2 before. It was actually one of the movies, or one of the movies we talked about that sort of sparked Cinemasters as an idea. So
that's right.
We have talked about.
And you know what's funny? I tried to remember that conversation because I think we came up with something really good in that conversation.
We did. We had some.
And I've actually I've forgotten it.
To be fair,
I don't know.
To be fair, I was a little hungover for that conversation.
Yes, you were not the only one who was hungover.
But no, I just want to say, so
if
any of our listeners are like, how come Nate and Andrew's pitches have some very similar ideas? It's because we sort of broke one of the golden rules of Cinemasters, which is we talked about this movie beforehand.
But
we
talked about it before we made the rules. So.
Yeah, we talked about it before Cinemasters was a thing. This was a movie that helped solidify Cinemasters. But enough about that. On to your pitch.
Forgot about it anyway. So on to, I guess I'll get into my pitch. It's actually pretty brief. I've managed to get, it's more broad, but here's the gist of it. So in this film, in this version of Shrek 2, Shrek and Fiona return to their swamp, and instead of a messenger crew saying come to the palace, it's an army shows up, because what the king and queen have heard is that Fiona's actually being kidnapped by an ogre.
Mm-hmm.
And so they go to rescue her, and when they get there, they find that she's actually happily married, and she wants nothing to do with them because this is what they did to her. And the first chunk of the film is them trying to, on the surface at least, them trying to win back the favor of their daughter, and them trying to understand what happened and try to make up for the mistake that they made. And they basically just set up camp right next to the swamp. Or like outside the swamp.
Oh, so there's literally your way to deal with the fact that she would never go to the castle is to shift the movie to the swamp.
Basically, yes. But it's still Fiona. Like Shrek is annoyed that his in-laws have showed up uninvited.
Well, I mean, it goes back to what his motivations from the first movie. Get out of my swamp.
Exactly. And I figured that would annoy him the most. Is like, I'm at home with my wife, and now my in-laws are here, and they're not going to leave. And they don't seem interested in leaving, even though none of us want them here.
Yeah.
And so that's essentially the drama for the first half of the movie. Now, what ends up happening is his in-laws end up inviting more more families. So instead of them being like king and queen, it's sort of like they're a family that owns land.
Oh, like house.
And they're a part of
the house of Far, Far Away, as
Exact-
opposed to the rulers of Far, Far Away.
Exactly. And then they invite other houses to come in and visit with them. And Shrek and Fiona are growing more and more agitated by this, but her parents are insistent that no, we want to have everybody here and we want to have a big celebration for you and we want to make up for what they did. And over the course of the story, Fiona starts reconnecting with her parents and starts maybe forgiving them a little bit more. What we soon learn is that one of the other houses, Fiona was originally intended to marry a boy from one of the other houses. And
Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I think that might be what subconsciously influenced some of this, because I am a huge Game of Thrones fan.
Oh, I hadn't noticed.
So,
yeah, that was sarcasm.
Anyway, so she was originally supposed to marry one of the sons from this other house, and this other house is actually secretly working with her parents to try and sabotage Fiona and Shrek's marriage.
Very interesting.
So there's also a component of them. They're newly married, and they're now it's sort of like happily ever after ? Because I always feel like that's something that's never really done in movies. It's always happily ever after. It like the movie ends with the relationship working or not working indefinitely.
Yeah.
And I've always like, why hasn't somebody done a movie which is like let's question this. Does this actually
There is
work?
a movie where they make a joke about it. It's called I think it's called Friends with Benefits, with Justin Timberlake and Mila Kunis, where she's like, how come they never show what happens in the like after Happily Ever After? And he goes, they do. It's called porn.
I haven't seen that actually.
It's not a bad movie.
Or, wait, is that actually, was that with Natalie Portman actually, or is it Mila Kunis?
No, it's Mila Kunis and Justin Timberlake.
Okay, I'm thinking of another film then that has Natalie Portman and someone else in it that she did after Black Swan. Anyway, but anyway, in this case, it's essentially that there are now complications with their own marriage. Family's actually trying to sabotage the marriage, and trying to find a way to reverse the spell that turned her into an ogre. And in the process, what they discover is that this other family actually hired a witch, like a witch for hire, to put a curse on Fiona as a child to turn her into an ogre so that they could find an excuse to imprison her. And with the intent of keeping her like locked up, because Fiona's parents actually owed a great sum of money to this other family.
Oh, so like basically it's like if they didn't lock her away, there's a possibility that she may have fallen in love with someone else.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and so the whole thing was she was supposed to marry into this other family in order to basically pay back this other family. But Shrek showed up and ruined all of that. So now that's essentially what the family is trying to do. Is the family is essentially trying to fix all of this, but it's actually another house that was involved in that.
Interesting.
And in terms of finding an ending, where I thought it would go from there is they can't actually completely sabotage the relationship between Shrek and Fiona. They try to, they almost do, but they still stay together. And in the end, they just say, well, we're just going to have to kidnap Shrek and try and kill him, essentially, and try and figure out a way to, and try and do it so that she doesn't know it was us.
Yeah.
And then she would find out that it was their plot, and she actually goes to rescue Shrek in this one. Yeah. So, and that would essentially, and then in the end, she goes, rescues Shrek, and by the end, her parents would have figured out that, oh, the other house was involved in all this. We got involved with these people who put a curse on our daughter. We should have not been stupid and done that.
Yeah.
And
maybe don't curse
everything
people.
works out. Yeah. It is kind of general. I wasn't able to get into too many specifics, but that's in broad strokes what I was thinking. It's basically, you take it, so it's Fiona's story. It's about her frustration with her parents and her now adjusting to being married. And you basically take like a situation that is common, where it's people get married and then they have in-laws come to visit. It's almost like a
It's My Big Fat
National
Greek
Lampoons.
Ogre, or My Big Fat
oh
Ogre
yeah, My
Wedding.
Big Fat Greek Ogre. Even
Yeah.
it's something that's been done before, but you just tell it in this universe, and there's also
Disney references,
fantasy
and pop culture
kingdoms
references
involved. So
Yeah.
there's a Game of Thrones component, but it's Game of Thrones for kids.
Yeah, Game of Thrones. I mean, I like it. My big thing that I really like about it is you haven't really changed too much of the actual plot. Like, most of the same stuff happens, except it's all in the swamp and the housing thing. So you haven't really changed at the core that much. But what I really think you could emphasize, and what I think you have emphasized, is though even though it's a Shrek movie, the movie is about Fiona dealing with her parents more than it's about Shrek dealing with Fiona's parents.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when Shrek gets kidnapped and the shenanigans that go on there, like, so in the original movie, Puss in Boots is kind of not important.
No, you could actually make the movie without him.
Yeah, you could
I think he's a cute character, and there's some great gags with him.
Yeah.
But he really
Superfluous.
shouldn't have been in the movie.
Yeah, so
unfortunately,
what if Shrek and Donkey have their like dynamic duo thing? You know what I mean? But like when Shrek and Donkey go missing, then you could have like Fiona and Puss in Boots, and have Puss in Boots be her sidekick, because Fiona really, other than the puppy dog they kind of introduce, it's like Fiona doesn't have a side character. So if the story's about her, then she needs someone to riff off of. So why not have this like, you know, Spaniard, kitten, Puss in Boots,
yeah,
right?
Which could be some pretty funny dynamics that ensue from that.
Right, because outside of Shrek, her parents, and Charming, and the fairy godmother, who does Fiona interact with?
There's silence on my end because I'm thinking, and I'm really trying to rack my brain, and I can't think of anyone.
Donkey, I think, is the other one that I missed.
Right.
Shrek, Donkey,
But yeah,
her parents, and the fairy godmother, and Charming. That's it. I feel like Fiona actually has less dialogue in this movie than she did in the original movie.
And she's way less active as a character. Like, you see her, she plays a much more central role in the first film, it feels. And she actually, well, the other thing is she makes decisions in the first movie that influence the plot.
Yeah.
Like, for example, her overhearing, or no. She talks with Donkey, then there's the misunderstanding, but she makes the choice to go with Farquaad. Yeah, she actually makes some choices in the first movie.
Yeah, and like even though they show her being a badass, like beating up the villains, like, because that's a carryover from the first movie where she like beats up Robin Hood's gang. Even though they show that in this movie, they still it's still like, yeah, she is a badass, but it's not shown through her decision making. She's not this like separate autonomous being that makes choices that affect the plot. The plot just happens to happen to her, around her, not because of her. Whereas the plot actually happens because of Shrek and the king, and to some extent the fairy godmother, but never really Fiona. And I think that was poor choice, because Fiona was part of what made the first movie so great. She was this lively, vivacious, outgoing, strong-willed, deliberate woman who wanted what she wanted and didn't want, and made choices that affected the plot, that were essentially caused the main conflict, right, of the plot, or the secondary conflict, I guess. Shrek and Fiona being together, or them not being together, was her choice, her in the original movie. In this movie, she doesn't. All she does is sort of argue with Shrek and then not kiss Prince Charming.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway,
and then say some platitudes, which are nice, which are very honest platitudes, but
it almost feels,
in terms of,
it almost feels like, in trying to create a sequel that undid a lot of what Disney tried to do, or what Disney had done. So in the original Shrek, they had, made this autonomous and very different. Our hero is an ogre. Our heroine is actually a badass, like princess. And in making a sequel, they undid that. At least the heroine part.
It does seem kind of like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. All right, so I'm going to get into my pitch if you're cool with that.
I guess I don't really have a choice, do I?
Oh, I mean, yeah, you can always
No,
hang up.
sorry, please go ahead. I'm very excited to hear your pitch.
Wow, you're ruthless today. All right. So I thought the intro, the way it happened, was totally fine. You could keep that up and even have Prince Charming and whatnot. That's totally fine. I'm okay with that. I feel as though Shrek's attitude towards Donkey should have shifted more after what we saw in the first movie. So I want to have Donkey can still be super annoying, but I think Shrek could be a little bit more understanding. It felt like the growth that had happened in the first movie was forgotten. It was gone. So I'd like to, Shrek appeared to have grown as a character. This isn't. So then when the invitation from Far, Far Away comes out, Fiona wants to go, just like she does in the movie, except the reason she wants to go is because she's seeking the approval of her parents. And we'll come back to that theme. But she's seeking the approval of her parents. So she's nervous as to whether they'll like Shrek or not. Shrek is like, this is a bad idea. Let's not go. Crowds and ogres don't mix. This is a fact. Let's not go. Let's just, stay here and be happy the way we are with Donkey and, all of our friends. We have a community here. Let's not mess with that. But Fiona is like, no, we have to go. And so we are going to go. And she manages to convince Shrek because it's important to her. When they finally get to Far, Far Away, I want to have more of an emphasis on the public's impressions and reactions of Shrek and Fiona. So how they treat ogres, how, Shrek is being, he's on his best behavior for Fiona, and people are still treating him like a jerk. They still are like, it's a scary ogre, get away. You know what I mean? So we're dealing with more of the public opinion rather than the king and queen's opinion. Shrek and the king can still disagree in the same way that they do in the movie, but we emphasize more of Harold's prejudice towards Shrek, like him being an ogre. So he's asking Shrek questions about Shrek's life that are sort of baseless and are based on public belief, based on fear-mongering about ogres, but not really what Shrek is. Like, and you don't even have to be totally on the nose about it. You can just be like, oh, so you eat babies? And Shrek would be like, no, because ogres don't do that. That's giants, right? Things that we heard about in the first movie. But like, it's like things that any kid would be like, oh, Shrek's not like that. We know Shrek's not like that. Why is the king making these assumptions about ogres when we know Shrek and Fiona are not like that? But he keeps having these prejudices about ogres and about Shrek. So they can have that whole rift happen. Then Fiona, on the other hand, is she realizes, well, maybe not realizes, but she is dealing with the emotional scarring of being locked away by her parents. So she really is doing anything for their approval, trying to win back their love because she feels like it was her fault she was locked away.
Oh, that's interesting. That's actually an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah. So she feels like it was her fault she was locked away. And so she's trying to do anything possible to win her parents' approval, even so much as pushing Shrek away, being like, no, maybe this isn't what I want. So then the fairy godmother can show up, and she plays on Fiona's fears by telling her that maybe the only reason she is with Shrek is because he was the first person that she had seen in years. And she was basically willing to love anyone who would love her in return. And that's why she's in love with an ogre. Right? So really playing on Fiona's fears there. So then the fairy godmother meets up with the king. But this time she's meeting up they're meeting up because they share the disdain for ogres. They share this like prejudice, and the two come up with a plan to replace Shrek. So the transformation of Shrek is actually the fairy godmother's plan to make Prince Charming take Shrek's place. So she convinces Fiona to like change back, and that she'll also change Shrek. And then, but then she does like a switcheroo and puts Prince Charming in Shrek's place. So then when Pinocchio and Gingy and the three little pigs, when they all show up, they're also riding on Dragon. That's like Donkey's like love interest from the first movie. They're riding on Dragon because why wouldn't you have a dragon? Like I just feel like
it was interesting that they didn't Dragon doesn't show up in this one.
Yeah, so I was like, no, we're gonna have Dragon. That's gonna be a thing. So Dragon's in the movie. Then Charming's attitude, Prince Charming's attitude, can still cause Fiona to miss the real Shrek. She doesn't know that it's not the real Shrek. Like the transformation, she thinks the transformation has caused this change, and she realizes that like she truly loves Shrek for like the original Shrek for what he was, with his quirks and all, not because he was different. The public doesn't approve of seeing like Fiona's fierceness about her love for Shrek. But Fiona does, but when her mother sees like Fiona's resolve, it reminds her of her and Harold's love, and so she softens. So she's like, "Oh, I see. Like you really do care for Shrek." And then Harold is sort of forced into revealing the plan, which is that that they switched Prince Charming. So then the fairy godmother, knowing that Fiona is still under the effects of the love potion, and will fall in love with the next person she kisses, forces Fiona to choose between saving her parents or kissing Prince Charming. So then the reason she's doing this plot is so that she can eventually have her son. We find out at that moment that Prince Charming is her son. We didn't know that at that point. Prince Charming is her son, and that she was trying to use it to have both economic power and political power. Because she's the number one exporter of like potions and hexes in the kingdom, but she could also have political power by putting her son in place. So this is all like a plight for more power in the kingdom. Then Shrek can show up with his gang. Sorry, I missed a part, but when Shrek is transformed and wakes up in the dungeon. And you know when like the three girls are like flirting with him, and it's like Jill, and she's like, "I fetched you a pail of water." So what I'd like to do here is show that now Shrek is human. All the prejudice that was shown to him before disappears, even though there's nothing that's changed on the inside. I wanted to sort of make an allegory towards well, not even just an allegory, but basically how people treat others just based on how they look. So now all of a sudden, Shrek can walk into one of the many Starbucks that are in Far, Far Away, and he's treated with dignity simply because he looks human. Nothing else has changed. And so we see like monsters are treated a certain way with a certain amount of prejudice, and because of the way you look, people are treated with a certain amount of respect. What's the word I'm looking for? People use it all the time. Privilege.
Oh,
right?
okay.
So you have like quote unquote human privilege because Shrek doesn't look like a human anymore. So now people treat him differently, which is, I wanted to focus on that a little bit. But sorry, back to the part. So during the course of the fight scene that's going on between Shrek and all his buddies and everything, the fairy godmother reveals that she was the one who placed the curse on Fiona in the first place, to get her, knowing that she could send her son to rescue Fiona and then get political power that way, and things went all wacky that way. But then they managed to defeat her and Prince Charming. Fiona expresses to Shrek that she was wrong to try and put him through all of this, and he was right all along, that sometimes it's not about changing, it's about, Fiona understands that the reason she put through Shrek all of this was because she had this desire to have her parents approve of her, because she felt like she was locked away because they didn't love her, and she just wanted to have their love, but not at the cost of losing Shrek, and she knows this now. So the two change back into being ogres, and they live happily ever after in their swamp with their friends, and sort of leave the king and behind, but they have sort of a bit of a mended relationship with Fiona, and Fiona's mother have a bit of more of a mended relationship, but it's still like, this will take time.
I like it. What I really like about it, I like the angle of making it so that Fiona feels like the whole tower situation was actually her own fault.
Yeah.
That's actually a very interesting choice. And I also really like the prejudicial component to it, because that was actually one thing that's hinted at in the movie, but certainly could have been explored more. And actually, you could have actually changed the story like you did, where Shrek starts feeling like, oh, this is actually better for me. I actually prefer this treatment, and then Fiona could then be the one to convince him to say, wait, no, but
this isn't who you are. Like, I liked you the way you were. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
which is actually even more powerful, because then you get Shrek questioning who he is, really.
Yeah, because at the end of it, it's like Fiona goes like, well, hang on, Shrek. Even though being human means you now get to experience all of this privilege that you didn't have otherwise, it also means that you're changing when really it should be society that changes.
Yeah,
right? Society
exactly.
should change its view of ogres. We shouldn't change our view of, or we shouldn't have to change to conform to society's view.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a much more interesting and more powerful direction to go with the story. And you've done it in a very clever way without having to change too much. I really like that pitch.
Oh, thank
that
you.
was good.
Yeah, I really didn't change that much. I just noticed certain things in the movie. What I really wanted to talk about, like the two main plots for me, without changing the core structure of the movie, the main themes that I went with were dealing with like PTSD of being abandoned. Because essentially that's what Fiona's parents do. They abandon her in a tower and lock her up. And oftentimes, like you said with your character, you wanted Fiona to be like, I don't want anything to do with my parents. But the another way to deal with that trauma that people do is they take the onus onto themselves, where they go, I have this bad relationship with my parents. Maybe it's because I didn't do enough. Maybe I need to do more. When in fact, some people and some damaging relationships are just, it's better to cut ties. It's better to cut ties rather, because you're just going to make yourself miserable trying to impress people who are never going to be impressed by you. And so that's what I was trying to show with Fiona. She wants the approval of her parents, but really it was never her fault that she was locked in the tower. You know what I mean?
I like that, because that solves one of the problems that I had, and I just made the assumption that she'd be mad at her parents, but that actually is also, I think, maybe an even more interesting direction to go.
Yeah, and then
because that is something that people do experience as well.
Yeah, and then then we can move into the second theme from that theme, because the reason her parents lock her in the tower after she's cursed, which is the fairy godmother's fault, after she's cursed, she becomes an ogre at night, and her parents are clearly prejudiced towards ogres, so they lock her up simply for being prejudiced, right? Which is the second theme I wanted to play on, which is privilege, monster privilege. Ogres are treated one way, and that's clearly based on things that are not factual, and when Shrek turns to human, he is treated in a different way, and even though he prefers it, it's supposed to be society that changes to embrace ogres, not ogres changing to conform to society.
I like that.
Oh, thank you.
I like your pitch more. Yeah.
Oh.
I think that's a much more interesting direction to go.
Well, thank you. I mean, I really liked yours having as Fiona as the main character, so if I could do it again knowing what I know now, I might even put Fiona as the main character and have more like still have the same themes that I talked about with prejudice and family ties, but have it happen more to Fiona. Like, remove Shrek from the equation. Like, if I took my pitch right now, just off the top of my head, where when Shrek is when they do the switcheroo with Shrek and Prince Charming, I would say that why not have Fiona be an autonomous character who realizes the prejudice towards her now that she's a princess, figures out Charming is not Shrek because she's not dumb, and then goes and rescues him.
Yeah. Because that I actually always thought that was a direction it should have gone. Anyway, like, why does she have to get rescued? Why can't she? And we know she's capable.
Yeah.
We know she's perfectly capable of doing that.
And then you could put Puss in Boots in there as well. Like I said before, when she's going to rescue them, the king could hire Puss in Boots to go and be like, bring back my daughter. She's gone off on some goose chase to save her ogre husband, which is crazy. And then Puss in Boots could show up and be like, now you have this adorable fuzzy sidekick because Shrek has donkey, you have Puss in Boots. Done.
Right.
Cut, paste, check the gate.
There we go.
Yeah. There's Shrek too.
There
Yeah,
we go. We dust there. I'm doing the dusting my hands off thing.
dusting my hands off.
Those
Yeah,
of you who can't see.
I like. I think our combined pitch is really strong there.
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, for you DreamWorks executives listening
Yeah,
right now,
Really?
who are looking to do another Shrek, I don't know.
they are going to do another Shrek, and I think we will eventually visit Shrek 3.
Yeah, I guess so. I have one. I only remember one scene, which is like a nightmare sequence. I don't remember much of that movie. I honestly have very little memory of what actually happens in that movie. They go on a boat. I think they voyage somewhere.
If Shrek 3,
and Shrek's gonna have.
if Shrek 3 is what I think it's about, it's basically like they need to find a new king, and so they basically go to high school, like medieval high school, to find the new king, and like Shrek and Donkey leave and basically leave everyone else behind. It's kind of weird.
Right. Oh, isn't it like King Arthur, like a teenager?
Yeah, he's like a teenager. It has some really neat ideas that I want to explore. But like that, yeah, and they sort of leave Fiona behind. One of the things I just realized, the fact that we're looking at Shrek 3, one of the things that happens at the end of this movie is that Shrek and Fiona decide to stay in Far, Far Away.
Is that what happens?
Yeah.
I remember, because I get full disclosure, as soon as Livin' La Vida Loca came on, I just skipped.
I know.
I was like, all right, plot's over.
No
done.
one will blame you for that because that's not a good
I didn't
song.
watch it.
Yeah.
I've seen it already as like years ago.
Yeah.
I figured.
It's not, nobody will blame you for that. But yeah, I thought it was weird. I was just thinking about it because in the beginning of Shrek, I believe the beginning of Shrek 3 is Fiona and Shrek have to find the next person to be king because King Arthur, or Shrek doesn't want to be king. He's like, I don't want to be king. And so they have to go find the next king, who happens to be King Arthur. But what weirded me out about that was that, in fact, they didn't go back to the swamp. They chose to stay in Far, Far Away, which I find kind of weird. Wouldn't Shrek want to go back to the quiet life in the swamp?
Yeah, you would think so. Yeah. Well, this is one question that I have for you. If we were to do a Shrek 3, would we build off of what we just finished with for Shrek 2?
Interesting.
And then go, if we were to do a third movie based on what we have just done, how would we do that?
I feel like that might be straying too far from the plot of Shrek 3. Because usually what I like to do is, as a general rule, is focus on the plot of the movie at hand and less so about outside preconceived ideas. But you know what? It might be interesting to do like an extra special long episode where we do just the movie as it is, and then we go, how could we do it based on what we had just come up with right now? Maybe a mini-sode.
That might be interesting.
Maybe a mini-sode.
A mini-sode.
Yeah, like a little mini-sode where we'll do like, a regular Cinemasters, and then we'll do a mini Masters.
Cinem sequel.
Yeah, where we just basically go like, well, here, like, you've heard our Shrek 3 based on the movie we got. Here's where we would go based on the movie we pitched. Yeah, interesting idea. But I actually don't even feel like the movie we just pitched would need a sequel.
Yeah, I think if a hypothetical studio executive came to us and said, hey, do another one, we'd go, no.
Yeah, well, I feel like
not doing it.
There's no need to go anywhere with that story. Like, we'd have to do something brand new with those characters that hasn't been done before. That really says something new. And I'm not sure we could do that with... I'm not sure we could really get there with another Shrek movie. The real reason I think people come up with sequels is, unless you're telling the story. I mean, Pirates of the Caribbean 1 was so successful that they were like, why not make it a trilogy? And you can see that the second and third Pirates of the Caribbean movies really suffer. They really suffer. The first one is so tight. It's one of my favorite action movies of all time, because it's not really like, I mean, it's not an amazing movie. It's not a classic, but it's a good, fun movie to watch. And it didn't need a sequel. And when they made two more into a trilogy, those suffer. I still love them, but they suffer.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. I enjoyed them too. But yeah, I agree. I think the first one certainly stands on its own.
I mean, the second one really only exists so they can have a third. There's some great like action scenes in the second one, but I mean, we'll do a whole movie on those. We'll do a whole episode on those because they're worth doing. Yeah.
There are other series though where it happens to work. Like, well, Alien 2 is pretty good. Alien 3 is also decent.
Yeah, and
I think
was Back
personally.
to the Future written as a trilogy?
I doubt it was, but I actually thought the sequels for that were okay too.
Yeah, actually, I agree. I actually, that's one of the few examples where I thought the third one was better than the second one, but it really worked. It really worked. So I don't know if that was shot like as sort of a trilogy anyway, but because if we look at Lord of the Rings, that was shot as one movie and then was just cut into 3 parts.
Well, they shot it. They had intended, from what I understand, to do it as 3 parts, but they shot it all at the same time for budget reasons.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it basically is, if you want to think about it, it is shot as,
But it's intended to be a trilogy.
yeah, it's intended to be. It was shot that way, and it always was. So, and I think that really, really worked in favor of that series. Whereas other series that you get a standalone movie that then get pulled into a franchise or pulled into a trilogy, the trilogies tend to suffer. But one of the reasons the Harry Potter movies work well is because each one is based off of a book and they all build on each other. So I know there's source material there, so it might not be the best example, but because they all build off of each other, you get a really excellent standalone movie, plus a building and overarching story, except for 5, because 5 is awful.
Oh, a Godfather. The first 2 Godfather movies are excellent. The third one, I think I would make the point, is still a great movie. It's just because the first 2 are so amazing, it doesn't look as good.
Isn't The Godfather Part 2 considered like one of the best movies of all time?
It is. It's up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's up there with the first Godfather. On a lot of lists, they're right next to each other.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things I will say in favor of Shrek 2 is that I did enjoy all the musical numbers. I thought I know that they, like, as you said, butchered a Bowie song, which they did, but I do enjoy singing on in animated features. I think if you're going to do a musical, you should go all out rather than just a little bit. Like, if you're going to do a musical, you should write original material. But I always will appreciate good movie music when I hear it. So. Yeah.
The original music, the original music written for this, I thought was good.
Yeah.
The song where, like, Fairy Godfather.
I need a hero. Yeah.
That one, and the in the room where she brings all the furniture to life.
Oh, that was hilarious because they're clearly riffing off of Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo,
Beauty and the Beast.
Beauty and the Beast, Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo from Cinderella, and Hickatus Pickatus from Sword in the Stone.
Okay.
Yeah. So I thought that was hilarious. I was like, oh, this is clever and fun. But again, it's at the detriment, not the detriment. It's ribbing at Disney. It's not clever for its own sake. It's clever because we get the reference they're making.
Yeah.
Not that that's a bad thing. I think you could be more clever about what you're saying rather than just ribbing on Disney.
Here was another interesting thing I was going to bring up. One of the things you'll notice about Far, Far Away is they have a lot of references to contemporary brands. Like, there's Old Navy's in there. There's Starbucks is in there, and they've just put like a twist
Farbucks,
on it. Yeah, and it's kind
Fat
of funny.
Boy McFryers.
Where this was actually done really well is in the more recent film Coco by Pixar.
I have not seen Coco.
So in Coco they go to the land of the dead.
I did know that.
And so there's a really great interview with Lee Unkrich, who was one of the directors of it, on NPR, Fresh Air, great podcast show. Terry Gross interviewed Lee Unkrich and asked him about this, and he said that in building this world of the dead, the easy thing that you can do is have a play on the brands that we know, but instead they tried to think really hard about what would this world actually be like, and not just do the easy let's make fun of things that we already know, but actually try and build something that was unique and original.
Yeah.
And they ended up creating a whole world that's really impressive, actually.
I think when riffing on the brands that we know works best is when you are saying something about consumerism, or when you're saying something about those brands and using it as a parody to pin out a point. So a good example of this kind of tool would be the way South Park will make fun of a particular brand where everyone knows what they're talking about, but they never said it explicitly. I think it works best then. Otherwise, you're just sort of poking fun at brands and societies in general. Like you say, them running across the street to another Starbucks. Everybody knows places and everybody hears stories about Starbucks right across from the street from each other. But what is it really saying about Starbucks other than that, white people really like Starbucks?
Right. Well, it was funny in that context. I felt like the joke worked really well in that context. But I know what you mean exactly. Like if you can. And I mean, they didn't in the current film. Like, this wouldn't be a huge faulting of the film. They wouldn't have had a lot of time to focus on it.
Yeah.
And it was something that was in the background that if you were paying attention, you'd go, "Oh, look, that's Old Navy, but they've changed it."
Yeah.
And, "Oh, that's I don't know something else, but they've changed it."
But
it
like
was
as you say,
thinking about the what they did with Coco was they really spent time building the world and going, well, let's try like actually making something. Like, what would this actually be like?
Almost thinking less about.
I'm sure they did that with this too. But.
Almost thinking less about what would be funny and more about what would this world actually require to function. Like
exactly.
So just to go really obscure, but when they're coming up with new Pokemon, oftentimes they'll think about the environment of the world in the game that you're playing and what Pokemon would actually exist there. So instead of just being like, "Hey, I drew this interesting Pokemon design," it's like, well, if you're going to have a location that is in the snowy north, in the tundra, what actual creatures would live there and why? How would they survive as Pokemon? And then you integrate them that way. You think about how evolution would inspire design. And that's actually how they come up with a lot of the Pokemon, is through that function.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I honestly thought it was someone in a room going, "Oh, this will be cool."
No, they're often based on real creatures that live in the environments that they want to do. So when they do a desert, they're like, "Okay, well, what is this? Why are we going to have a cactus Pokemon? Like, what does the spikes do for it? Well, it protects the water because water is so important." You know what I mean? Like, there's function to a lot of these Pokemon, and I feel like, to get back to the point,
I want to know what Porygon is based on.
Porygon is a computer program.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a digital. That was before there was the digital type.
Well, I mean, this is before the internet was really widespan too. So
right, but they were really about beyond the curve, or before the curve with that one.
Yeah, but what I want to get back to originally is instead of just riffing on Farbucks or far away bucks or Fat Boy Friars being McDonald's and stuff like that, what you could do is be like, what would these people need to function as a society, and how would their society build around that to make it real? And I feel like that's what you're talking about with Coco.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I think that about does it for Shrek 2.
Yeah. I'm looking at my notes here, but I don't see anything else.
Yeah,
that I wanted to talk about.
I enjoy our new pitch that we put together. I think our double pitch, where Fiona is the main character, makes a really, really good one. I'm going to save this just in case we want to do that mini-sode you were talking about. So I'm going to save my notes.
Okay.
And then, so let me get this straight. I'm going to see if I can do this. It's Draper Nate on Twitter.
No.
Ugh, I'm trying so hard. So it's
because that's okay. Because it took me weeks to figure it out, and it's my own Twitter account, so I don't blame you.
Okay, you do it then. You do it.
So it's Nate Draper on Twitter, and it's Draper Nate on Instagram.
Nice. Awesome. And then, of course, you can always catch Cinemasters on YouTube, where if you give us a like and a subscribe, it helps the channel grow and reach more people. Share it with your friends. You can always catch us on Facebook, and then iTunes and SoundCloud if that's your jam. And you can take us on the go and listen to us while you're doing dishes or in the car while you're driving to your grandma's house. And next week we are doing The Matrix. So we're about to get a little cerebral up in here and talk a little bit more about Porygon, and by that I mean computer programs.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was a great segue.
Oh, thanks. And we'll see you next week on... I'm sorry, what was that?
I said that was great, connecting Pokemon and the Matrix. I've never seen that done before. Well, I really appreciated that.
It's a talent. And so we'll see you next time on Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline.
All right, take care.
Take care.